Amen.
What I'm going to do is what I do is I collect at least half your grades before what day? Draws day. Because that's why I want all these, I want them all graded, I want them all back to you. I will give you each a card with your estimated grade and speak to each separately in lab. But if I don't have enough grades by then, I won't have good information for you, what you may or may not need or decide to do. I'm going to keep us on a schedule, and I'm supposed to cover all this material, period, within the DCI. We're going to start back up. You're supposed to be waking up. Hold on, I'm going to get this one. To respond to us. Okay. Is it humming? Is it humming?
Mm-hmm. But it's still red.
But it's
It's
still
not
red.
humming.
Oh, you're humming. You're humming.
I hear something from that door when I
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's try again. It's
Yeah,
blinking.
it's turning on
Now we should have hum.
now. Yeah.
Nice little blue. Blue means good. Blue means good. Candace thinking about it. I'm gonna get that out. There it comes. Okay, we're going to finish up the eukaryotes. Then I'm going to give you hopefully a review. And then of course we do have the test Tuesday. Yes, I'll admit there's one group that had their test postponed, but they had a substitute teacher. Okay? And I wanted to be sure to cover everything I had covered, everything for you. If that ever happened, we'd end up having to do the same material faster for the next sections. I'd have to really speed up on you. So this actually is going to keep you at a certain pace. Now, coming back to the protozoa, eukaryotic organisms, remember protozoa are animal-like cells. Okay, I'm going to start with the one that has alveolates on the front. Does everybody have the one that has alveolates on the front, like the alveoli in your lungs? Okay, and I'll pass them back to you now. Okay, another one has alveolates, and the one side has ciliates, and it says dinoflagellus. Alveolates. Yeah, I just saw it. I'll help you out. Okay. Right. Well, started. We talked about this a little bit briefly because I make notes about where we leave off. But back to protozoa. Animal-like cells as a group. That means no cell wall. Cell walls are for plant cells, right? And for also bacteria. That type. Most of them are chemoheterotrophic, which means they have to hunt down their food. There is one small subgroup, that I emphasize as can be base-infected. That's what the protozoa are. Alveolates, which is this group, means they have that little sac-like structure somewhere inside them that looks like a little what? A little empty sac. They don't know what it does. But they named it after the little alveoli in our lungs. We went over ciliates, we went over apoplectins, but we're going to go to the toxoplasma, and I'm going to start back up. Toxoplasma. Remember that. Fine. Think of your cat. Your cat. I'm going to show you a movie. This is a Russian rat. It is in Russian, probably, but don't worry about the narration. You can see what happens. Toxoplasma can do this. It is very, very unique. I'll give you some other information in just a minute. Okay? Huge rat. The rats, there's the cats. Turn up to the cats. Just whatever. multitude, right? Spray cats. You know not to before, but that's toxoplasma. Toxoplasma goes through both the rat and the cat, or also mice and cat. And it will make the mouse or rat change its behavior and run up to a cat. Normally they're what? Afraid. It wants the cat to do what? Eat it. Then the protozoan, the toxoplasma, will get into the cat. These cats won't cooperate. They don't know what's wrong. So toxoplasma has an intermediate host, so mouse, rat, cat. It can also cross the placenta. If you clean your cat's box and it has eaten a rat and is contaminated, it can cross the placenta if you're infected, and it can damage and or kill your fetal child. So if you are pregnant, or your sister's pregnant, or your daughter one day is pregnant, or your wife is pregnant, they should never clean a cat box. Ever. They say a lot of us have this infection. A lot of us, because our immune system keeps it under control. But there can be consequences. But that's yes.
Do all cats have it? I mean, it's in all cat boxes, or if they're...
Only if they're infected with, if they ate an infected rat. The numbers change. I spoke to one vet, she said about 40%, other people say 60%. You can take a guess. They don't really survey. They don't really go in and check.
I'm just saying, I don't know many house cats like rats. I'm just overeat. I mean, is that the only way they have to eat a mouse or a rat? But I mean,
Mice too. Must be mice. And other animals can kill it. Okay? So that's toxoplasma.
And that's a protozoan, right?
It's the protozoans. In this case, it comes down to aviolates of a type of Ava complexan, and that's the toxoplasma. It's also in your photosense.
so if that rat, will it eventually die from this, or it just keeps acting like that until
They don't usually die like that.
Oh.
Usually we can eat.
it's easy to eat?
Okay. It's what?
The rat fearless.
Yes. And also it's attracted to the cats. There's another research that came out that they said the rat now thinks the cat smells like the opposite sex of a rat. Because it goes into the brain, and the toxoplasma changes how the brain reads sensory input. So it's thinking they're rats that it wants to be with us. Okay. That was our standard.
Cat's behavior when they have it?
No, they don't really change their behavior, but they'll pass it on. Now, they did do an epidemiology study with human beings. They didn't infect us. In Europe, and you can take this for what it's worth. One researcher says it makes women much more passive if there's infection. It makes men much more aggressive. Because he studied the number of accidents and things that happened with people that were infected with this. But that's still one study. That's one study. You can't base it on one study. Okay? Toxoplasma. Toxoplasma. Feel sorry for your poor cat. All right. Going over here, I'm going to move now to the dinoflagellates. The dinoflagellates. Briefly, these can be bioluminescent. What does that mean? If you've ever been on the ocean and it's dark, and a ship disturbs, it glows. It can either be in some of the fish, but if it's in the water and a ship goes through and disturbs the water, there's a glow. So they are responsible for the glow. As soon as I say large percent of the plankton, you think beginning of the food chain. Their flagella, they can have one that pushes them through the water. They can have another flagella that's like a belt around their equator. That's just to spin them around. So that's the environmental, a little bit on the structure right there. All right? Pathogenic points, I'm going to flip to the back. I'm going to the back. There are a pair in one group, and there's one by himself. Gymnodinium and Glaniolox. Gymnodinium and Glaniolox. They produce a neurotoxin. A neurotoxin. Of course, we're talking about in the ocean. In the ocean. They can do major fish kills, which it says right here. Now, the point here is that they can be accumulated, or their toxin can be accumulated in shellfish, mussels, clams, oysters, etc. Do you know how those animals work? They're filter feeders. So they pull the water through from wherever they are in the bay or the ocean, and they will accumulate whatever's in the water. They're doing it because they want food. They're pulling nutrients out. as a consequence, they will accumulate heavy metals, they will accumulate pollution, they will accumulate pathogens, and they'll also accumulate toxins. Toxins. In this case, we're talking about the toxins. So if you're going to have shellfish, you're going to have to be certain that either they're in clean water or that they've been moved and they've been flushed with a lot of clean water. So otherwise you're coming for trouble. On the flip side, there is a note that's been talked about. Zebra mussels are now in the Great Lakes. Well, they got there, they're an invasive species out of the ballast of ships. When ships leave a port far, far away, they can't float real high on the water, they could flip. So they pull water into tanks, ballast, and the ship will ride lower. They get to their next port, and what do they do with the water? They dump it, and then there are laws going back and forth about whether they're allowed to do that. Zebra mussels got into the Great Lakes. They thought, terrible, 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 yes, they will plug maybe sewage out tubes or whatever. But they're filter feeders and they're all water. They're cleaning up the Great Lakes. Great Lakes are actually having less and less pollution because of the zebra mussels. Now, moving over to Pfiesteria over here, has a potent toxin. Both of these use a toxin. Possible estuary-associated syndrome, memory loss, confusion, headaches, respiratory problems, skin rash, muscle cramps, diarrhea, nausea. What is left out? No, diarrhea is there too. Okay. This is powerful. If a person is sensitive, if it just, the toxin just gets up into the air, or if you touch a fish, it can make you sick. It will also eat fish. And they're speaking. Now, coming up here is this Pfiesteria. It will eat the outside of the fish. And of course, if you touch that, that's not good for you. It has a neurotoxin, it has a toxin. Okay? And it can also make sores. That's a little bit dramatic. I'm always going for the more dramatic picture to help you remember. Everybody okay with that? Okay, well, everybody's not okay with that, but everybody's with it. Next, it says protozoa and the euglena. The euglena. Does anybody need this one? Because kinetoplastids, I want you to see euglena at the top. Euglena at the top. Okay. Euglena. I'm sorry to tell you, this is a lot of this organism does this organism does that. Trying to make it interesting with stories and pictures. And it's going to take a lot of memory. Are you okay? Euglena? Everybody else? Euglena? Okay, in a few minutes, if you haven't raised your hand, we're going to go on. Okay? Okay? All right, the euglena. I just said these are all protozoa, and most of them are chemoheterotrophic, which means they have to eat their food. Then I said there are exceptions. Guess who the exception is? The euglena. The euglena. Euglenids, right here, they will perform chemoheterotrophic, they will eat their food when it's dark. They will perform photosynthesis when it's light. So if they were our size, they could be our friend as long as we're out in the sunshine with them. But if it's nighttime, they might eat us. Okay? Over here, the euglenids, says photoautotrophic, that just means photosynthesis. Chloroplast, well, that's the little membrane that does the photosynthetic. Chloroplast. Then I'm saying about chemoheterotroph is similar to animals. And all I want to say about movement is they can do something called euglenid movement, which isn't a pseudopod oozing out like an amoeba, but it can sort of squish a little bit, called euglenid movement. Coming on to euglenosa, I'm even going to skip this kinetoplastids. You don't even need to know that part. I do want to go to the pathogenic points down here with these two. Pathogenic points. Leishmania, what I want you to know with that one is it's a zoonosis. I mentioned this before. The factors.
Anthracis.
And what?
Anthracis, what? Anthrax.
No, Leishmania. Anthrax is a zoonosis too. What's a bacteria? This is a protozoa. Zoonosis means it jumps from what to us? Animals to us. Trypanosoma, that's going to take some knowledge. It has two different diseases with two different vectors in two different parts of the world. So learn it as trypanosoma for Africa, and the second one is trypanosoma for the Western Hemisphere. And lab will get into the actual species, but trypanosoma is good enough for this test for you. In Africa, it causes African sleeping sickness. The vector, which is back on that vector sheet, is the tsetse fly. Of course, people get very, very tired. Here, it causes Chagas disease. Chagas disease. C-H-A-G-A-S. It used to always be south of the Rio Grande River. What does that mean? Mexico and further south. It's moved into our country. It's in Texas, it's in Southern California, it's in sporadic places around. What happens with this is this. The vector is the kissing bug. Yes, it's a type of cockroach, but it's a weird one. It's not the ugly one that you see around your house. It has a very long nose, and it likes to come out, and unlike going after your food, like the other cockroaches, this one comes out and crawls on you and wants to find your blood. It feeds off the blood. It's called a kissing bug. But a kissing bug because people thought it was biting people more around the mouth when it came out at night. It can really bite anywhere, but it likes to go for thin parts of your skin. So even one in the mouth, it'll probably go for eyes. It's not the mosquito, it's not the tick. It doesn't inject the disease organism into it. It poops on the skin. Puts a little puncture wound right here, defecates while it's eating. You're asleep and you have this little teeny itch that it needs to move and you don't know it while you're asleep. And you run. So you just want to inoculate yourself. It goes in, it can hide for 10, 15 years, can come out, cause massive damage to you and can kill you, but yes, it can be treated too. The student that I talked about, that I heard about from a nurse, was a high school student, went, no symptoms. What do symptoms mean? It was blood in the body. Hidden, latent, quiet. If he had not done that blood donation and they tested, he could have had it for 5, 10, 15 years. When it came out, it wasn't serious. Right? So we're very glad that he was a generous spirit who decided to donate blood. Good for him too. Okay, so that's these down here. And then euglenosa, those are not photosynthetic, only the special euglenos are.
So once he would have become sick, say, can he transfer from person to person, or is it just, you just have to get it from?
You have to get from the bug. But the bug likes to bite, and it will transfer for us.
So if a bug bit him and then bit someone else,
Oh yeah, that's what happens. Good one. Going to the back, Diplomonadida. Diplomonadida. I'm not going to ask you to know Diplomonadida. I am going to want you to know this about the pathogen below, which is Giardia. Like Giardia, depending on which part of what country you come from. These organisms have two nuclei that are the same size. So they have two nuclei that are the same size. The unique thing about him is if you look at a sample, usually it's feces, fecal diarrhea, and you see a protozoan looking back at you, those two nuclei together look like eyeballs to a lot of people. He's looking back at you. The second you see that, you've got Giardia. Yes, it's in dogs quite easily. The dogs can give it to you. The dogs go drink some water outside. Maybe there's some cyst or some Giardia feces in there. Well, they're in there. Comes in, you can catch it from the dog. Also is endemic in bears out west. Is endemic in bears out west. So if you want to go hiking out west and the water's too heavy to carry very far, and you want to drink from the clear, cold water where nobody lives, bless you, you can still get what? Diarrhea. Because the bears are there. Bears are there. Causes diarrhea. It's one of the most common diarrheal diseases for protozoans in the United States. One person told me they thought they had it in their well water. Okay? And yes, you can cure it. You can cure it. It's not usually the more intense dangerous level, not usually. So, like I said, this does does that. That takes us up to, and it finishes, completely finishes the protozoans. I'm now heading for the fungi. The fungi. With the fungi, this is straight from your book. I first want to start off with talking about life cycles of fungi. To help break it down into groups. Break it down into groups. There you go. Good God. Who needs one? Let me pass them out. Who needs one? Okay. Everyone, you got one? Okay. Who needs one? We have to help you. And then line. Okay, pass it back, please. Pass it back, please. Pass it back. Okay. Oh, you don't have that. Let's not do that. Is everybody set for this? Set for this. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit now with these pictures, which I'm going to come back to. This is going to be more of a reminder for you. I'm going to go to the focus notes. Let's go to the focus notes. So in this case, let's turn it up real fast. See what else. Wake it up today. We talked about the protozoa. As I said, everything in here is in the focus notes. 3 ways they move used to be the old way to classify them before I move on to fungi. You don't have to know this quite yet, but know they can move by flagella, pseudopods, cilia, or non-motile. Your apicomplexans are non-common. I want to add one group before I go on, the group Parabasala. You really need to know the word though, Trichomonas. Have y'all heard of this? You're in nursing. Trichomonas is a what type of disease? STD, sexually transmitted disease. They look like fat raindrops with flagella on the sharp end, or some people say pears. One nurse was telling me there was an outbreak in the local area about a year ago. Males, no symptoms. Males, no symptoms. Females, stinky, foamy exudate, and it can sterilize you. So trichomonas, STD infection. Females definitely get symptoms, males don't. But of course, pass it on. Pass it on. We've done all the alveolates, which we talked about. I'm not going to go over again, so I'm going to do my review later. The one I want to go to, I'm heading for the fungi. And all this has been done. I told you it was here, fungi. There are certain classes of fungi. Zygomycetes, Ascomycetes, and that's why I have this handout, because how they reproduce sexually decides whether they drop into Ascomycetes or Zygomycetes. How they reproduce sexually decides whether they're Ascomycetes or Zygomycetes. Coming down to Basidiomycetes, that's your mushrooms. You in the fairy ring? Giant see the fairy ring? There's a fairy ring out here on the way in for a couple of days. It's a ring of mushrooms in a circle. It can also be puffballs. You ever played with puffballs? Push them and all this little black dust comes out. You know what that was? Thousands of little dots that dispersed into the air. Those were spores. Or bracket fungus. It's like bookshelves almost on a tree or a dead log. Okay. A couple of these. First I want to go over reproduction. And the points I want to make out, I'm going to start with the Ascomycetes. I'm going to talk about some of the differences. Yes, I'm not going to emphasize part of the cycles, but I want you to know the following things about the cycles. Both Ascomycetes and the Zygomycetes have 2 loops for the reproduction. Take one loop for asexual reproduction and one loop for sexual reproduction, and they can flip between them. That's the first difference. Question. They can go asexual, which means the DNA does what? Stays the same. They go sexual reproduction. They have combined DNA with another organism, and the DNA has been what? Changed a little bit, reworked. Over here, if you go over here to the asexual, I want you to know that the fruiting body for Ascomycetes is called a conidiophore. It's right here. That means this aerial hyphae and all the spores on the end. That is called a conidiophore. Called conidiophore. And each one of those fingers with hundreds of spores on it is called a conidium or conidia. Like the hair, and you put a lot of beads that are spores on it, that's called the conidia. That's the asexual. Asexual. Now all that does is the filaments, which are called what for fungus? Hyphae. They grow underground for a long period of time. They reach the point that they put up an aerial hyphae. The aerial hyphae here produces spores on the end with a fruiting body technically called the conidiophore. Spores float off, land to get another fungus form. All those filaments together with all the fruiting bodies, and you'll see this up here in a minute, is called the mycelium. The mycelium. See that little pyramid across the end. An infection with a fungus is called what? A mycosis. An infection with a fungus is called a mycosis. And where's the number of those in there? So that's easy. He's just growing. Huge mycelium that means his body, all the filaments. Finally rises up out of the ground or off of the bread or out of the cheese or whatever he's doing in your lungs. Aerial hyphae gives way spores, conidiophores, the fruiting body gives off spores, same thing repeats. The other loop, I said 2 loops, is sexual. And the way it works here is the fungus that you may have, they don't call male and female. They're not called fungi male and female. They call the hyphae either plus hyphae type or negative hyphae type. How simple can you think? This fungus has plus hyphae type and that one has negative hyphae type. Where the plus and negative tips of the 2 different types of hyphae meet, they fuse. That's called what? Sexual reproduction, because they're fusing the what? DNA. You go from 1 end copy to 2 end because you do what? You fuse your DNA. And both of these, that little area where they double is called the dikaryon, D-I-K-A-R-Y-O-N. That's that all I want you to know right there. D-I-K-A-R-Y-O-N. As the hyphae rises up, we call it sexual. Do you remember from biology what meiosis is? M-E-I-O-S-I-S. What does that do to the number of chromosomes? Cuts way back in half. So the plus and negative strands meet. DNA fuses. You start getting a rise up from that special structure called the dicaryons, right? But it doesn't stay 2 end. That means 2 copies. As it's rising, it undergoes meiosis, which means it cuts the number in half. So you're back to what? 1 end. Some of the spores will be plus spores. Some of the spores will be what? Negative spores. They go flying off in the air. If the organism lands and it's negative, the whole organism is a negative hyphae organism, can asexually reproduce, or might meet a plus organism out there. This has a different name for the fruiting body in the sexual cycle. I want you to know it. This is called an ascus. A-S-C-U-S. In this case, with sexual reproduction of Ascomycetes, the fruiting body, that aerial hyphae with the spores on it is called an ascus. A-S-C-U-S. What do you think the group is named after? Ascomycetes, ascus. It's named after the sexual fruiting body. Named after. Okay. I'm moving to the back now. This is your zygomycetes. Again, 2 circles. One circle for asexual, the other circle for sexual. And the asexual is real easy. The mycelium's going underneath your cheese. Finally, he's really gotten well fed. Rises up, gives a little bit of a fruiting body. Actually, this will probably be your bread. Okay, let's say it's on your bread. You got that bread on the discount now. Maybe some Italian bread. Gonna make it. And little things start growing on the surface. Okay, this is what's happening. This fruiting body, aerial hyphae, and the 1 end spores with that big spore head are called sporangiophores. Sporangiophores. The difference between this and what you saw in aspergillus in the lab is this has a clear balloon around the spores. Aspergillus is just open to the body. And you keep going around and around. Spore lens is the negative spore. You get a negative mycelium underground, grows around, reproduces asexually. You get some more sporangiophores. They give more spores out. The only time it changes to sexual is if they what? Plus N meets a negative N. Then they will briefly double numbers around the dicarion and rise up. In this case, the fruiting body, guess what? It's called a zygosporangium. Zygosporangium. That's for the asexual part. I'm not going to give you the little bit where it briefly goes back to another form of that. If you know this, you're okay. So the sexual fruiting body is the zygosporangium. But it's undergone meiosis, so it's still giving off spores that are either plus or N, plus or negative, 1 N. Does that make sense? What does meiosis do? Splits the number. Let's do it one time, some people get lost. Plus and negative N meet. Well, that's sexual reproduction. You've just gone from 1 N copies to 2 N. As the hyphae rises, aerial hyphae, you have meiosis that cuts the numbers in half in the chromosome. So you're not 2 N, you're now back to 1 N, which means each spore is now going to be a plus or a negative, not a combination of plus negative, or plus plus or negative negative, a plus or a negative. Special name for this is the zygosporangium. Spores go out, land, then new mycelium, new filaments, hyphae for the organism. What do you think it's named after? Zygomycetes, zygosporangium. The groups are named after the sexual what? Fruiting body. Now that's technical stuff. I want to make it a little bit more interesting now. I have some pictures. I want you to know examples for each. Ascomycetes, and yes, that's my stuff. Penicillin, Aspergillus, Claviceps purpurea. I want you to know these three. I say, what does belong? Do these have conidiophore? Well, they have to, okay, because that's the asexual form. Do they have zygosporangium? No, because that's for the zygomycetes. So learn the associations. 4, zygomycetes, I'm asking you to know 1, that's rhizopus. Rhizopus is the bread mold. You have to know rhizopus. Rhizopus is the bread mold. Penicillin, you've seen it, can give us the antibiotic. Aspergillus, you've seen it. All of these can give you respiratory infections. All of them. Claviceps purpurea, I want you to know. It grows like little teeny oval additions amongst, you ever seen the head of a grain, well, a stalk of wheat or oats or barley, or even grass, because they're all actually types of grasses. You have all the seeds, right? But in between the seeds are little teeny ovals, is Claviceps purpurea. Claviceps purpurea is the original source for LSD. It was the original source for LSD. So if you eat enough of it, you're probably going to have hallucinations, you're going to have wild imaginations, and have an effect on you. I just said it's in the grains. Of course, there's more when it's humid, right? What did I say about molds and humidity? Humidity is present, you get more mold. If it's drier, you have less. So, if it gets into the wheat and you eat whole wheat bread and all your bread is contaminated with the Claviceps purpurea, you're going to have a problem. They watch out for this today. In old days, there was a time in history in the United States where there was they know the historical records, there was an extremely wet winter. In a certain area, in a certain state around the town, people started, they say, were having visions and hallucinations, and they started accusing people of being crazy but witches. Some people think the Salem witch trials may somehow be linked in to their entire food crop being badly contaminated from Claviceps purpurea. Because they have very wet water. And that's just one of the thoughts. Here's some of the words I'm talking about. Okay, we're talking about the mold fungus. Of course, the mold fungus has a hyphae. The unicellular form is what? Saccharomyces cerevisiae, brewer's yeast, Candida albicans, yeast infection. Entire mass, there's the word mycelium. There's the mycelium. They're saprotrophs. That means they usually grow off of dead organisms and break them down. They're decomposers, cellular bacteria. There is a little teeny ant, is a little ant, but if one of its co-friends becomes infected, they will drive that ant out or kill it and drag it out if it becomes infected with a certain type of fungus. Because if the fungus is allowed to continue, it eats the ant from the inside out and will put, guess what, fruity body up through the head. As soon as that fruity body releases what? Spores, and it's inside the ant colony. What happens to the ant colony? They're all infected. Some people in some parts of the world think that's a delicacy they eat them. Okay? But that's for each. Okay? Hyphae, septate, and non-septate. Septate means there are separations. But they always have little teeny holes in the center because the cytoplasm flows through the whole mycelium. Non-septate means there's not even little mini walls or incomplete walls in between. Biggest organism on the face of the planet by weight is what? Fungus. They went out west, they checked for miles, hundreds of miles, and they had the same mycelium with the same DNA on the forest floor. One huge organism, heavier than a blue whale, has been there for centuries, growing the mycelium on the ground. They remember, absolutely, mold fungi have a cell wall. There is no what? Photosynthesis. If I say photosynthesis, you immediately know it can't be a fungus. Mycorrhizae simply means that sometimes some of these fungi will associate with roots of plants and help the plants absorb more nutrients from the soil. Actually, they make your crops better. They make your crops better. Of course, you know you get some things like cheeses from them. Okay, you do get some immunosuppressant drugs. I don't know if those mentioned that, but maybe you can get some drugs. Remember, they can grow at higher osmotic pressure than bacteria. So they are the ones that can grow in your jams and your jellies and your preserves. They can survive higher osmotic pressure. Mycosis means what? Fungal infection. And respiratory is one of the worst because it's hard to get rid of. Dimorphic means they can change shape. Well, what does that mean they change shape? You have two forms. Unicellular yeast, multicellular filaments of hyphae. Some organisms can flip between the two. That's called dimorphic, or two shapes, morphic means shape. Often these are the ones that cause us problems. Technically, Candida albicans, I would put it under yeast, but you can go dimorphic. You can go dimorphic. Everybody okay? All right. Zygomycetes. We talked about the sexual cycles of both of these and the Ascomycetes. Rhizopus is just the bread mold. Bacillomycetes, I said those are the mushrooms. You cannot tell always a poisonous mushroom from a non-poisonous mushroom. Last I heard, there was a guy bragging over 10 years ago that he could always tell if he would go eat what he wanted out of the woods. He ended up doing what? Poisoning himself. I think he lived, but I think his nature idea sort of went away there. Okay. Bacillomycetes, if we're talking about the mushroom, think about that cap. Did you ever do this as a kid? Take the cap off, put it on a white piece of paper, and tap it. Pick the cap up and move it away. What's left on the paper? A symmetrical black outline. Because that cap is actually the fruity body. What dropped down? Spores. Spores. That's what I need. Wow. Okay. Criponellus pernii, Crinotellus, called Witch's Brew disease pernii. He's wiping out the cocoa trees, which make what? Chocolate. So that's one of the reasons chocolate prices can go up amongst others. Entire people are losing their whole plantation. Fungus is killing them. Now, I'm going to come back and show you some pictures of my brain death. I want to get through the material first. Lichens. They are symbiotic organisms. What does that mean? That two are growing together. Half of him is, guess what? A fungus. And the other half is either a photosynthetic bacterium, can be cyanobacterium, or it can be an algae. Well, algae are really plants. So in either case, the other partner is what? Photosynthetic. Lichens only grow where it's clean. If your area has pollution, you will not have lichens. So they're actually an indicator of how nice your environment is. They grow on rocks, they break down rocks. They grow on trees, and show you pictures of some of them. You've seen them, they're sort of flat and flaky looking. In the Arctic area, they are the food for the reindeer. That's what they eat, the lichens. We can also make some perfumes and some things from them, like a litmus paper. They indicate clean. Okay, they have the phototrope, which is the part that's photosynthetic. It wouldn't be deep in the lichen, it would be on the surface because it's closer to the light. To the sun. Two ways they reproduce. Just a piece breaks off, but it's going to have both the photosynthetic part is going to have the filamentous fungus, called Soredia, to get a full lichen. Breaks off, goes in the wood, and washes away in the water. Ready to what? Start what? Spreading, brushing, and give you a new lichen. Or a piece of the fungus breaks off, goes away, must be missing. He doesn't have the photosynthetic organism. He's got to actually find one and form a symbiosis with it before he becomes a lichen. Lichen has to have and think clean environment. Clean environment. Very clean environment. And as I said, some perfumes. Water moles. This is a nasty. This case, there it is. Phytophthora infectans. I want you to know Phytophthora. There was a massive immigration to Canada and the United States in the 1800s. People came from a very nice country, but they had to leave or starve to death. Some people did stay. That country depended on one crop, monoculture. Phytophthora went through. By the way, they keep changing what group they put it in. So they put it in fungus, and now in water mold, they put it somewhere else next year. Okay? Wiped out the entire crop. One thing said that you could go through, they would get everybody in the village to try to help save the crop, but before sundown, everything was black in the ground. Millions and millions of people starved to death. What was it? Irish potato famine. This is how. He still destroys potatoes today, but we're not monoculture. Okay. Not good. And they said one person going through thought that he was looking into one of those nice cottages, this was like white stone and a thatch roof. Thought there was a bunch of rags in the corner until one of the rags moved. It was a family that was starving to death. Starving to death. And don't forget bad guy. Algae groups. Do you think the algae affect us? No, they don't affect us. They're photosynthetic. I do want you to know a few little things about algae. I'm going to do this, and then finish up with a PowerPoint and go back to a review. Who needs algae? I'm talking about chlorophyta. 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 Ask about, I'm handing it to you, you don't need it, because somebody behind you raised their hand. Somebody behind you raised their hand. So algae, they are essentially what? Plants. Photosynthetic or not photosynthetic? Photosynthetic. Can they move?
No.
No. Have you ever seen trees out there walking around? Goodness knows, as much as we cut our grass, we're really glad it can't move and hunt us down. Cell walls or no cell walls? Cell walls. Okay? Now, this is not hard. They're named after the pigment that they have in their chloroplast and drops them into grooves. Chlorophyta means green. Rhodophyta means reddish. Phaeophyta means brownish. And then there's a yellow-green one, which is the Chrysophora. Okay, so it's named after the color. Named after the color. Okay, Chlorophyta, just plain on like green algae. You see them growing all around here. Prototheca, some people gives a skin rash. That's just one. Cadmium, some people, islanders, use it like pepper. By the way, black pepper is loaded with organisms. If you ever take black pepper and sprinkle it onto a TSA plate, you're going to get a lot of growth. Okay? What?
Is that bad?
No, we're here. Okay, there's organisms everywhere. I just like telling you what's going on. Okay. Not much to say here. There's no disease. Well, yes, some of them can produce toxins in the water in the ocean, and we can get the toxins or we can infect the fish, but there's nothing infecting us. Rhodophyta means red. Okay? Need to know this though. Like complex polysaccharides, we get agar. Does that sound familiar? From the rhodophyta. We also get carrageenan. Look in your ice cream. If you want your ice cream to taste and have a nice creamy texture, which it can, they put carrageenan in. Now maybe they're putting it in because you want to lose weight and doesn't have as much weight as cream and fat. Or maybe they took that out and sold it for something else and they can make cheaper ice cream for you and then just make it creamier by putting the carrageenan in. So you can think either way you want to on that one. It's also in toothpaste. It's in your creamy Italian dressing. If you get the key point here, it's in anything that you want to have a smooth texture. Look at your ingredients. I promise you, you've got it in your house. Got in your house somewhere. Okay? And let me go to Twinkies. Oh my gosh, Twinkies and cockroaches will be around. Phaeophyta, brown algae. These are often multicellular. These can be the huge kelps that will stretch from the bottom of the ocean all the way to the top with air bladders because they want to head up toward the what? Why? They might be brown, but they're still photosynthetic. Go out to west, our continent shelf goes down slow and shallow. Well, not quite does, we're teeny little people, so we knows. Out west, it goes, drops to an abyss almost immediately. So in the Monterey Bay Aquarium, I understand how they have a chance to be there. They have a beautiful window. They have a great kelp forest higher than the trees. You have an abyss. And coming through all the brown kelps, you can see huge marine. Because that's their forest. That's their forest. Chrysophyta, that means, well, green golden or golden green. Silica, now say about silica. Glass. Opal, mother of pearl. Think of that. That's what their shells are made of in their cell wall. They have two halves, like an egg, that will fit together with those little plastic eggs. They're called pustules. Are they photosynthetic? They're still algae. Yes, are they modal?
No.
No, because they're still algae. The whole group. I want to talk about one thing. Diatomaceous earth. Do you know what that is? You can get it at Home Depot, Ace Hardware, and Lowe's. Again, you know what flour's like? Flour will poop. Out of these algae, they will grind up and make diatomaceous earth. You take it and dust it over your plants, and the insects go walking over it. It will kill them, because when they get it inside, it cuts them off. It can also be used, as it says here, we said glass slide, right? That's the pesticide. It can be like a thin layer you can add to your pool water to help filter out, but don't do that unless you have a pool filter that works. Can't just do this. Okay? Reflective paint, because it's silica, is what? Glass slide. So you get more color bounced back at you. So it's brighter. And of course, some other things. Fireproofing is another reason. We did aquaponic vectors already. Every last one of them. I want to show you some things. I'm heading for a partial review, but I'm reviewing the prokaryotes first. And there's your poor little, who's that? Toxoplasma. Who's this? Well, that's actually bacterial. I'll talk a very special association. Just look at bacteria. I want my pictures up first and I'll separate them out. Think bacteria, prokaryote or eukaryote? Prokaryote. I said important symbiotic nitrogen fixer. Important symbiotic nitrogen fixer. Can form nodules with the roots. And soybeans, clover, peas. He takes what? Nitrogen out of the air, fixes it, gives it to the plant. Plant gives him fixed sugars. These are the nodules. The organism is rhizobium. He's extremely important for keeping our fields fertile. Keeping our fields fertile. And have you ever seen soybeans? Soybeans. They're in everything you eat. Look at your ingredients. They grind them up, put them in all, everything you can think of. Especially good for fake meat and hamburgers. Always grinding up soybeans and putting them in there so they eat. Okay? So, in the roots. In the roots. Let me see, here's the bacterial. These are all bacterial. I want to show you the other one. Look at that. Let's come back to this. Okay. Coming back to eukaryotic organisms, a little bit of review and then I'll go as much as I can. Megallaria, eukaryotic.